The glass towers of Manhattan stretched toward a gray October sky as Selena Vale stood at the head of her boardroom table. Her reflection multiplied across the floor-to-ceiling windows like an army of herself. The 20-piece Hermes suit hugged her frame with military precision, every thread chosen to project power, control, invincibility. "The Milan acquisition closes tomorrow," she announced to the 12 executives seated around the Italian marble table. "Our revenue will increase by 40%. Anyone who can't keep pace with our expansion is welcome to submit their resignation." The silence that followed was absolute. These were titans of industry, men and women who commanded 8-figure salaries and destroyed careers with a single phone call. Yet none dared meet her gaze directly. Selena Vale didn't just run a fashion empire, she was the empire. Every stitch, every campaign, every hostile takeover bore her personal signature of ruthless perfection. At 30, she was the youngest CEO to grace the cover of Forbes 3 times. Her luxury brand dominated runways from Paris to Tokyo. Presidents' wives wore her designs. Celebrities begged for access to her collections. She had built an empire worth 9 figures from absolutely nothing, clawing her way up from foster care through a world that treated beauty as currency and trust as weakness. "Meeting adjourned," she said, gathering her platinum MacBook with movements that suggested coiled violence beneath designer silk. The executives filed out in respectful silence, but she caught fragments of whispered conversations. "Ice Queen. Never seen her smile. Wonder if she's even human." Let them wonder. Fear was more reliable than affection. Respect was more valuable than love. These lessons had been carved into her soul in the bombed-out streets of Kabul and the predatory boardrooms of New York. Vulnerability was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her assistant knocked softly on the glass door. "Ms. Vale?" Dr. Morrison's office called. "Your test results are ready." Selena's fingers paused over her keyboard. "Cancel my remaining appointments. Have the driver bring the car around." Hey there, amazing family. Before we fully dive into today's story, I have a small favor to ask. If you enjoy our content, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, and tap the notification bell so you never miss a single story from us. It costs you nothing, but it means the world to us. And now, let's continue. 20 minutes later, she sat alone in her penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, the medical envelope unopened on her Italian marble desk. The space around her was a monument to success original Picassos. Custom furniture that cost more than most people's annual salaries, windows that framed Manhattan like a kingdom she'd conquered through sheer force of will. But tonight, surrounded by the fruits of her ambition, she felt hollower than the mannequins displaying her latest collection in the corner. The envelope seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. She'd known something was wrong for months, the fatigue that no amount of caffeine could fix, the pain that carved through her abdomen like broken glass, the irregular bleeding she'd ignored, because weakness wasn't permitted in her vocabulary. With hands that had signed billion-dollar contracts without trembling, she tore open the envelope. The words hit her like sniper fire. Stage 4 cervical cancer. Aggressive. Metastasized. 18 months. Maybe 2 years. With experimental treatment. But there was another timeline that made her chest constrict with something approaching panic. 6 weeks. That's how long she had before chemotherapy would destroy any chance of preserving her fertility forever. The report slipped from her fingers, scattering across the marble like autumn leaves. For the first time in a decade, Selena Vale felt truly afraid. Her fingers traced the phoenix tattoo on her shoulder, the one she'd gotten after surviving hell and rebuilding herself into something untouchable. She'd fought her way up from nothing, survived manipulation by mentors who saw her beauty as commodity, betrayal by the foster family who sold her secrets for drug money. She'd clawed her way to the top of a world where trust was suicide and love was ammunition for your enemies. But now, staring death in the face, she realized there was one person who had ever seen past her armor to the broken girl underneath. One man who had risked everything to save her without asking for payment or demanding her soul in return. Her phone felt like a weapon in her hands as she scrolled through her encrypted contacts. There it was, a number she'd memorized but never called, stored under an alias that only she would recognize. Ghost, Cade Virelli. The name still made her pulse race with something between terror and desperate longing. He'd been the ex-intelligence officer assigned to extract her from that Taliban compound in Kabul 10 years ago, when she was 20 and naive enough to think humanitarian work could save the world. She'd been captured during a school visit, held for 3 days in a basement that smelled of blood and broken dreams. When the rescue team finally came, it was Cade who'd carried her bleeding body through the rubble, who'd whispered reassurances in the darkness, while bullets shattered the walls around them. For 2 weeks in that military hospital, he'd been her anchor to sanity. They'd talked through the nightmares, shared stories under the harsh fluorescent lights, and somewhere between her recovery and his next assignment, something had grown between them that neither had been brave enough to name. Then he'd disappeared. Orders came through. New mission. Different war zone. He'd left without saying goodbye, and she'd spent years trying to forget the way his gray eyes had looked at her like she was worth saving. Now her hands trembled as she dialed his number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. "Selena?" His voice came through rough, cautious, tinged with that familiar edge of danger that had always made her forget how to breathe. "How did you get this number?" Even after a decade, he recognized her voice immediately. The realization sent electricity through her nervous system. "I'm Selena Vale," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I get any number I want." The silence stretched between them, heavy with 10 years of unspoken words and the weight of secrets that had shaped both their lives since Kabul. "What do you want?" His tone was carefully neutral, but she could hear the undercurrent of something deeper, surprise, caution, and beneath it all, the same pull that had connected them in that hospital room. "We need to talk, tonight." Another pause. She could hear traffic in the background, the distant sound of construction. He was somewhere urban, somewhere busy, building his own empire from the shadows, just as she'd built hers from blood and silk. "Selena?" That was a lifetime ago. "The Met, the rooftop garden, where you taught me to identify constellations while we waited for extraction." The memory slipped out before she could stop it, those stolen moments when he'd pointed out Orion and Cassiopeia through the bombed-out windows of their safe house, his voice gentle in a way that had made her believe safety was possible. The silence that followed was loaded with everything they'd never said to each other. "Why?" he asked finally. "Because this might be the most important conversation we ever have." Cade Virelli ended the call and stared at his phone for a full minute, his mind racing through possibilities and threats, with the automatic precision of a man who'd learned to expect danger from every corner. In the 10 years since Kabul, he'd built Virelli Security into one of the most exclusive protection firms on the East Coast. Presidents called him. Fortune 500 CEOs trusted him with their lives. His company operated from a sleek building in downtown Washington, D.C., all black glass and cutting-edge technology. A fortress disguised as corporate respectability. But beneath the legitimate business, shadows followed him everywhere. The bounty on his head had only grown larger over the years, placed there by cartels, whose operations he'd systematically destroyed during his government days. He'd saved innocent lives and made powerful enemies. Now he lived in the space between safety and danger, protecting others while remaining forever hunted. Selena Vale. The name had haunted him for a decade. He'd followed her rise to power from a distance, watched her transform from the broken girl he'd carried out of Afghanistan into a force of nature who commanded global respect and fear in equal measure. Every magazine cover, every business acquisition, every ruthless corporate victory, he'd witnessed her evolution into something magnificent and untouchable. And he'd never stopped loving her. The problem was that loving Selena Vale from a distance was one thing. Being in the same room with her again was a risk that could destroy everything he'd built, everything he'd fought to become. But her voice on the phone had carried something he'd never heard before: vulnerability. Selena Vale didn't do vulnerable. She did power, control, devastating beauty weaponized into corporate dominance. For her to reach out after 10 years of silence meant something was catastrophically wrong. He looked at his reflection in the window of his office, noting the new scars that mapped his body like a roadmap of violence. The way his dark hair had silver threads now, the lines around his gray eyes that spoke of too many wars fought in too many shadowy places. He wasn't the same man who'd carried her out of Kabul. That man had believed in happy endings and the possibility of normal lives. This man knew better. But when Selena Vale called, you answered, even if it meant walking back into the fire that had never really stopped burning. The Metropolitan Museum's rooftop garden was closed to the public after hours, but obstacles like locked doors and security systems had never been particularly relevant to either of their skill sets. Cade arrived first, positioning himself by the stone balustrade with clear sightlines to all approaches. Old habits. The October air was sharp with the promise of winter, and Manhattan glittered below them like a circuit board of dreams and ambitions. He'd chosen this spot deliberately all those years ago: high ground, multiple exit routes, far enough from the street that conversations couldn't be overheard. Even in the hospital, he'd been thinking tactically about their safety. She appeared at exactly midnight, moving through the shadows with the predatory grace that had made her famous on runways before she'd conquered boardrooms. The years had refined her into something even more dangerous, all sharp edges and calculated beauty wrapped in a coat that probably cost more than most people's cars. But her eyes, those deep brown eyes, still held the same mixture of strength and hidden fragility that had first made him forget every rule about professional distance. "You came," she said softly, her voice carrying across the space between them. "You sounded scared," he replied, studying her face in the ambient light from the city below. "I've never heard Selena Vale sound scared before." She moved closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something expensive and complex that probably had a French name he couldn't pronounce, close enough to see that her hands were trembling slightly despite her composed exterior. "There's a first time for everything," she said, then reached into her designer purse and pulled out a manila envelope. She held it out to him without a word. The silence stretched between them, filled with 10 years of separation and the weight of whatever revelation was about to change everything. Cade took the envelope with steady hands, recognizing the letterhead of a major medical center. His expression shifted as he read, something raw and unguarded flickering across his features despite years of training in emotional control. When he looked up, his gray eyes were bright, with something that looked suspiciously like tears. "How long have you known?" 3 days, she whispered, her voice cracking despite her attempts to maintain control. And there, on a rooftop garden overlooking the city she'd conquered, Selena Vale finally let her armor show its cracks. The most powerful woman in fashion, reduced to a terrified human being facing her own mortality. "Cade," she said, and the way she spoke, his name carried the weight of everything they'd never said to each other. "I need to ask you something." The rooftop garden felt charged with electricity as they faced each other across 10 years of silence. Neither moved immediately, two apex predators studying each other, calculating threat levels, measuring the changes that time and violence had carved into their bodies and souls. Selena circled slowly to the left, her designer heels clicking against stone with the rhythm of a countdown. Cade mirrored her movement, maintaining distance, his gray eyes tracking every shift in her posture. They moved like dancers who'd learned different choreography, but still remembered the music. "You look different," she said, her voice carrying that familiar edge of challenge. "Harder." "So do you." His gaze swept over her with professional assessment, mixed with something hungrier, more dangerous. She smiled then, the first genuine expression he'd seen from her tonight, sharp and predatory and devastatingly beautiful. "I had good teachers." The scars on his neck caught the city lights as he turned his head. 3 parallel lines, too precise to be accidental. Knife work. Recent. "Someone tried to kill you," she observed, stepping closer despite every instinct that should have warned her away. "Someone tries to kill me every few months. It's become routine." He didn't retreat as she approached, but his muscles coiled with readiness. Occupational hazard. What occupation requires that level of risk? The kind that pays well enough to afford bulletproof cars and safe houses in 12 countries. His smile was grim. "I protect people, Selena. Important people, dangerous people. Sometimes the lines blur." She was close enough now to see the flecks of silver in his dark hair, close enough to notice how his shoulders had broadened with muscle earned through violence rather than gyms. This wasn't the soldier who'd carried her out of Afghanistan. This was something more lethal, more refined. "Do you remember," she said softly, "what you told me that night in the hospital, when I woke up screaming?" His expression shifted, walls lowering fractionally. "I remember everything about those 2 weeks. You said fear was just adrenaline with nowhere to go. That courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was doing what mattered, despite being terrified. You also said," she continued, moving another step closer, "that some people are worth saving, even when they don't believe it themselves." The space between them had shrunk to mere inches. She could see his pulse beating in his throat, could feel the heat radiating from his body. 10 years of separation, and the magnetic pull between them was stronger than ever. "Why are you here, Selena?" His voice was rough, barely controlled. "After all this time, why call me?" Instead of answering, she let her fingers trace the air above his scars, not quite touching. "Tell me about Kabul. Tell me what really happened that day." Flashback. Afghanistan. 10 years ago. The compound was a maze of concrete and desperation, every corridor echoing with the ghosts of screams. Cade moved through the shadows like death itself, his team spread out behind him in perfect formation. Intelligence had confirmed. 1 American hostage, female, captured 3 days ago during a school visit. He found her in the basement, zip-tied to a chair, blood matting her dark hair. But when she looked up at him through swollen eyes, what struck him wasn't her injuries. It was the fierce defiance still burning in her gaze. This girl hadn't broken. After 3 days of hell, she was still fighting. "Are you real?" she whispered. "Real enough," he said, cutting her restraints with movements precise enough to avoid causing more damage. "Can you walk?" She tried to stand and collapsed immediately. Without hesitation, Cade swept her into his arms, her weight barely registering against his adrenaline. "What's your name?" he asked, as explosions rocked the building above them. "Selena Vale." "Hold on to me, Selena. Don't let go." The extraction was chaos, gunfire, falling debris, the acrid smell of smoke and blood. She buried her face against his neck, her breathing shallow with shock and pain. But her grip on his tactical vest never loosened. In the helicopter, as medics worked to stabilize her, she looked at him with eyes that held something beyond gratitude. "Why?" she asked. "Why risk your life for mine?" "Because," he said, his hand gentle against her cheek, "some people are worth saving, even when they don't believe it themselves." "Present, you remember," Selena said, her voice thick with emotion. Every detail, every word. Cade's hand moved to cup her face, his thumb tracing the faint scar along her temple, a souvenir from that basement in Kabul. "You were so young, so brave. I'd never seen anyone fight like that. I learned from the best." She leaned into his touch, her defenses crumbling inch by inch. "You taught me that survival wasn't just about staying alive. It was about becoming something stronger than what tried to destroy you. Look at what you became." His voice held genuine admiration. "A business empire, global influence. You turned that pain into power. And you?" She gestured toward his scars, his coiled readiness, the way he automatically scanned their surroundings, even during intimate conversation. "What did you become? Something necessary. Something that stands between innocence and the people who would destroy them." His smile was sharp as broken glass. I hunt monsters, Selena, and sometimes I become one to do it." The admission hung between them like a blade. Selena stepped back, reassessing this man who'd once been her salvation, trying to reconcile the gentle soldier in her memories with the predator standing before her. "Is that why you disappeared?" she asked. "After the hospital? You just vanished without a word. I got new orders. A different war zone. But that wasn't why I left." His jaw tightened with old pain. "I left because you were 20 years old and traumatized, and I was falling in love with you. That wasn't fair to either of us." The confession hit her like a physical blow. "You loved me?" "Past tense," he laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Selena, I've spent 10 years trying to stop loving you. I followed your career, your success, your transformation into someone untouchable. I told myself it was better this way, you building your empire, me fighting my wars. Safe, clean, no collateral damage. But here you are," she said softly. "Here I am." His gray eyes locked onto hers. "Because when you call, I answer, even when I know it's going to destroy me." Selena took a breath that felt like jumping off a skyscraper. This was the moment, the cliff edge, where she either retreated into safety or chose to fall. "I have 6 weeks," she said, her voice steady despite the earthquake in her chest. 6 weeks before chemotherapy starts. After that, I'll never be able to have children." Cade went very still, his tactical mind already processing implications and possibilities. "The doctors said I could freeze my eggs," she continued, "but I don't want to do this with some anonymous donor. I don't want a stranger's genetics mixed with mine. Selena, I want it to be you." The words came out fierce, uncompromising. "I want our child, Cade. The one I never let myself dream about because dreaming meant weakness in my world." The silence that followed was loaded with 10 years of unspoken longing and the weight of an impossible request. "You don't know what you're asking," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm not some safe suburban dad with a picket fence and a retirement plan. I have enemies, Selena. People who want me dead. Getting close to me is a death sentence." "I've had death sentences before," she said fiercely. "I survived Kabul. I survived foster care. I survived men who tried to break me and use me and throw me away. But I might not survive this cancer. And if I don't, I need to know that some part of us will continue." Cade turned away, pacing to the edge of the garden with movements that screamed barely controlled violence. "So what are you asking me exactly? To be a sperm donor? To give you a baby and disappear when the bullets start flying?" The pain in his voice nearly shattered her resolve. "No, I'm asking you to marry me." He spun to stare at her, shock replacing the carefully controlled mask he always wore. In that moment, she saw past his defenses to the man underneath, the one who'd whispered reassurances in hospital darkness, who'd looked at her like she was worth saving. "I'm asking you to be my husband through this war," she continued, moving toward him with predatory determination. "I'm asking you to help me create life and then fight like hell to stay alive to raise that child together. Selena, you don't understand. I'm asking you to take the biggest risk of your life with me, to bet everything on love, when death is hunting both of us." She reached for his hands, and after a moment of resistance, he let her take them. "I'm asking you to forgive me for being too damaged to choose you before, and let me choose you now when nothing else matters." His hands were warm, calloused from years of violence, marked with scars that told stories she might never fully know, but they held hers with infinite gentleness. "The bounty on my head is $5 million, he said quietly. "The cartels I destroyed don't forgive. They don't forget. They use family as leverage, pain as currency. Anyone I love becomes a target. Then we become targets together." Her voice carried the same steel that had built her empire. "I've spent 10 years building walls around my heart, protecting myself from pain. But the greatest tragedy isn't getting hurt, Cade. It's never allowing yourself to truly love." Cade looked down at their joined hands. his thumb tracing the constellation of small scars on her wrist, evidence of the night she'd cut herself free from restraints in a different war zone, a different life. "Do you know what happened after I left the hospital?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You got new orders, different mission. I got court-martialed. The admission came out like broken glass. For emotional compromise. For letting personal feelings interfere with operational effectiveness." Selena's breath caught. "Because of me? Because I requested to be reassigned as your permanent protection detail. Because I wanted to stay with you instead of completing my mission rotation. Because I loved you more than I loved my career." His smile was bitter. "They were right to question my judgment. I was 28 years old and completely out of my depth. What happened to your career? Dishonorable discharge, loss of pension, blacklisted from government work." He gestured toward the city sprawling below them. "So I went private. Built this company from nothing, taking jobs that no one else would touch. High risk, high reward. Protecting people who lived in the gray areas of legality. Like me," Selena said quietly. "Like you." He studied her face in the ambient light. "Your foster family sold information about your whereabouts to human traffickers when you were 16. Did you know that?" Her blood went cold. "What?" "I've been watching over you for 10 years, Selena. Not directly, not intrusively, but monitoring threats. Making sure certain people knew that hurting you would have consequences." His voice carried lethal promise. "Your foster parents died in a car accident 3 years after you aged out of the system. It wasn't an accident." The revelation hit her like a physical blow. "You killed them? I protected you. The same way I've been protecting you from a distance ever since." His gray eyes held no apology. "You think your business empire faced no serious threats in 10 years by accident? You think rival companies backed down from hostile takeovers because they suddenly developed ethics?" Selena stared at him, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Business deals that had fallen through at the last minute when victory seemed certain for her competitors. Rival executives who'd withdrawn from bidding wars without explanation. Investigative journalists who'd started digging into her past, only to abruptly change focus to other stories. "You've been my guardian angel," she whispered. "I've been your ghost, watching, waiting, making sure the world knew that Selena Vale was under protection, even if you didn't know it yourself." "Why?" The question came out as a sob. "Why do all of that and never contact me?" "Because you deserved better than a disgraced soldier with blood on his hands and enemies at every corner." He cupped her face with infinite tenderness. "Because you were building something magnificent, and I refused to be the reason it came crashing down. And now you're dying." The words hit like bullets. "Now the safe distance I maintain doesn't matter anymore. Now the only question is whether we're brave enough to choose each other when everything is falling apart." Selena felt tears streaming down her cheeks, 10 years of suppressed longing breaking free all at once. "I searched for you. After I got out of the hospital, I tried to find you. The military said you were classified, transferred, unreachable. I know. I watched you search. It nearly killed me to stay hidden. I built my entire empire trying to become someone worthy of the man who saved me," she confessed. "Every business victory, every magazine cover, every moment of success. I was trying to become someone you might choose to love." "Selena." His voice broke on her name. "You were already worthy. You were always worthy." They stood there in the Manhattan darkness, two people who'd spent a decade running from the most dangerous thing in their lives. The possibility of being truly seen, truly known, truly loved by another human being. "The real question isn't about having a child," Cade said finally. "The real question is whether we're willing to stop running from each other." "Are you?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "I've been running for 10 years, he said, his forehead resting against hers. "I'm tired of running." "Then stay," she whispered. "Choose me. Choose us. Choose the life we never had the courage to build before." The Manhattan skyline glittered around them like a constellation of possibilities, and for the first time in a decade, neither of them was looking for the exit. "My beautiful family," If you're still here with me, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button, because what happens next will put you at the edge of your seat. Now, let's continue. 3 weeks later, the private chapel in Monaco gleamed like a jewel against the Mediterranean coastline. Selena stood before an ornate mirror in the bridal suite, adjusting the simple black Valentino dress she'd chosen for practicality as much as beauty, dark enough to hide bloodstains if their enemies decided to crash the ceremony. "Security perimeter is locked down," Cade's voice came through her earpiece, calm and professional despite the circumstances. "Thermal imaging shows clear. Aerial surveillance active. We're as safe as we're going to get." Their wedding wasn't a fairy tale, it was a military operation disguised as a romantic celebration. Guest list limited to 12 people they trusted not to sell the location for cartel money. 3 escape routes planned and practiced. Bulletproof vehicles positioned at strategic intervals. Even their vows had been written in code, meaningful to them, but innocuous to anyone monitoring communications. "You know," Selena said into her microphone, applying lipstick with steady hands, "most brides don't have to worry about sniper fire during their ceremony. Most brides aren't marrying men with $5 million bounties on their heads," he replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Having second thoughts? Never." The word came out fierce with conviction. "You? Ask me again in 50 years. The ceremony itself was beautiful in its controlled chaos. Cade's grandmother's ring, a simple band of platinum that had survived 2 world wars, slid onto her finger with the weight of promises they'd waited a decade to make. As they kissed to seal their vows, security teams maintained overwatch through bulletproof glass, a reminder that their love story was written in a language of violence and protection. "Mrs. Virelli," Cade whispered against her lips, and the name sent electricity through her entire system. "I like the sound of that," she whispered back. Within hours of their return to New York, the integration began. Cade's security teams took positions throughout Selena's corporate headquarters, their presence invisible but absolute. Her boardroom meetings now included threat assessments. Her fashion shows incorporated tactical planning. Her business empire gained a layer of protection that made it virtually impregnable. But it was more than just physical security. Cade's analytical mind, honed by years of intelligence work, revolutionized her corporate strategy. He saw patterns she'd missed, anticipated moves by competitors that would have blindsided her, identified weak points in her business armor that enemies could have exploited. "Your Milan acquisition," he said one evening, studying financial reports spread across their dining table. The timeline was accelerated by 3 months last year. Why? Selena looked up from her laptop, where she was reviewing designs for next season's collection. Market opportunity. The previous owner needed cash quickly, or someone pressured them to sell, made them an offer they couldn't refuse. His finger traced connections across documents. "This company has ties to Eastern European textile suppliers, the same suppliers that funnel money for arms dealers." The realization hit her like cold water. "You think my own acquisition was compromised? I think we need to audit every major business decision you've made in the past 3 years. Your enemies have been playing a longer game than we realized." Meanwhile, her treatment began with the precision of a military campaign. Chemotherapy appointments scheduled between board meetings. IV sessions conducted in secure medical facilities with Cade's team maintaining perimeter security. Even her cancer treatment became an exercise in tactical planning and risk management. Selena faced each treatment with the same ruthless determination that had built her empire. But now she wasn't facing it alone. Cade held her hand through the nausea, researched experimental treatments with the same intensity he'd once applied to hunting terrorists, transformed their penthouse into a medical fortress where she could recover in safety. "The doctors say response is good," she told him after her 3rd treatment, her voice hoarse but triumphant. "Tumor markers are down 40%. "We're winning," he said simply, and the way he said, "we," made her chest tight with emotions she'd never allowed herself to feel before. But victory came with a price. Within a month of their marriage, intelligence networks began reporting unusual chatter. Cartel communications mentioned Selena's name. Photographs of their wedding had surfaced on the dark web. Their enemies had discovered the connection, and now both their lives hung in an even more precarious balance. "They know," Cade said, ending a secure phone call with his contacts in various government agencies. "The Kozlov cartel has put a bounty on you. 2 million. Alive only. They want to use you as leverage against me." Selena set down her tea with steady hands, her mind already shifting into strategic mode. How long before they move? Days, maybe weeks. His jaw tightened with controlled fury. "I can relocate you. Safe house in Switzerland. New identity. Complete protection." "No." The word came out sharp as a blade. "I didn't marry you to hide in some mountain bunker while you fight my battles. We do this together. Or we don't do it at all." 6 months later, their marriage had been tested by pressures that would have destroyed most couples before their first anniversary. Assassination attempts, 3 of them, each more sophisticated than the last. Corporate espionage that required rebuilding their entire digital security infrastructure. Medical complications that sent Selena to the emergency room twice, with Cade fighting through hospital security to reach her side. But they'd survived. More than survived, they'd thrived. Virelli Vale Security had become one of the most powerful private protection firms in the world, their client list reading like a roster of global influence. Selena's fashion empire had expanded into new markets, protected by security networks that made corporate espionage virtually impossible. Their combined resources created something unprecedented, a business partnership that was bulletproof both literally and figuratively. "The Kozlov cartel made a mistake," Cade said, reviewing intelligence reports in their shared office, a space that combined her aesthetic sensibilities with his tactical requirements. "They assumed you were my weakness. They didn't realize you were my strength multiplier." Selena looked up from sketching designs that incorporated hidden protection features, beautiful clothing that concealed body armor, elegant accessories that doubled as communication devices. "They underestimated both of us." Fatal error. His smile was sharp as broken glass. "Their entire leadership structure is being rolled up by Interpol as we speak. Turns out, when you combine fashion industry intelligence networks with military-grade surveillance capabilities, cartels become very easy to track." But their greatest victory wasn't professional, it was personal. They'd learned to fight together instead of alone, to trust each other with vulnerabilities that had once seemed too dangerous to share. Selena's health had stabilized. The experimental treatment was working better than anyone had dared hope. Her latest scans showed no evidence of disease progression. "Clear margins," she announced, walking into their bedroom with test results that felt like a reprieve from a death sentence. The oncologist used the word remission for the first time. Cade looked up from the tactical gear he was cleaning, old habits from a lifetime of preparation, and his expression transformed into something that made her forget how to breathe. "Say that again," he said softly. "Remission. We're winning, Cade. We're actually winning." He crossed the room in 3 strides, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around like they were characters in a romantic comedy, instead of 2 people who'd spent months expecting bullets from every shadow. When he set her down, his hands framed her face with infinite tenderness. "I love you, Mrs. Virelli. I love your strength, your brilliance, your refusal to back down from any fight. I love that you chose me when you could have chosen safety. I love you too, Mr. Virelli. I love that you saved me twice, once in Kabul, and once when you taught me that the most dangerous thing I could do was also the most necessary, opening my heart when I had everything to lose." Their kiss tasted like victory and promises, like second chances, and the kind of love that burns bright enough to light the way through any darkness. But perhaps their greatest triumph was the simplest one. They'd learned to be vulnerable with each other. In quiet moments between corporate takeovers and security briefings, they shared pieces of themselves that no amount of money or power could buy. Selena told him about foster homes where she'd learned that love was conditional and safety was temporary. Cade told her about missions where he'd lost people he was supposed to protect, carrying their ghosts like invisible wounds. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked one evening as they watched the sun set over Manhattan from their penthouse balcony, the city sprawling below them like a kingdom they'd conquered together. "Regret what?" "This. Us. The danger, the complications, the way our lives became infinitely more complex the moment we chose each other." Cade considered the question seriously, his arm tightening around her waist. "I regret that it took us 10 years to have the courage to try. I regret all the time we lost being afraid. But this?" He gestured toward the life they'd built together, part love story, part business empire, part military operation. "This is the most beautiful chaos I've ever been part of. Even with the death threats?" "Especially with the death threats." His laugh was rich with genuine amusement. "Anyone can fall in love during peacetime. It takes something special to choose each other in the middle of a war." 1 year later, Selena stood in the executive boardroom of Virelli Vale headquarters. A gleaming tower of steel and glass that rose from downtown Manhattan, like a monument to what two people could build when they stopped fighting against each other and started fighting together. The walls were lined with awards: Forbes' Most Innovative Security Firm, Vogue's Fashion Empire of the Decade, Fortune's Power Couple Reshaping Global Business. But the achievement that mattered most sat in a file folder on her desk. Medical reports showing 24 months of continued remission, clean scans, normal blood work. The word cured hadn't been spoken yet. Cancer survivors learned to think in terms of years rather than absolutes. But hope was no longer a luxury they couldn't afford. "The Dubai contract is signed," Cade announced, walking into the boardroom with the controlled precision that still made her pulse race after all this time. 3 royal family members, full security package, plus fashion consulting for state events. Revenue projection is $40 million over 2 years. "Not bad for a morning's work," Selena said, signing the contract with hands that no longer trembled. "Though I still say we should have charged more for the bullet-resistant formal wear." "Next time." He moved behind her chair, his hands settling on her shoulders with familiar intimacy. "Dr. Peterson called. She wants to schedule your quarterly follow-up." "Already?" Selena leaned back against him, drawing strength from his steady presence. "Feels like I just had one." "Because you're getting better at living between appointments, instead of just surviving them." It was true. The woman who'd once measured her life in quarterly earnings reports and hostile takeover schedules now thought in longer terms: 5-year business plans, decade-long strategic partnerships, a future that stretched beyond the next medical crisis or assassination attempt. The question of children had resolved itself in ways neither of them had expected. The fertility preservation treatments had been successful embryos, safely stored in a facility protected by the same level of security as nuclear materials. But as Selena's health stabilized and their empire grew, they'd discovered other ways to build a legacy. The Virelli Vale Foundation had become one of the largest providers of security training for humanitarian workers in conflict zones. They'd established scholarship programs for foster children interested in business or military careers. Their companies employed over 3,000 people worldwide, many of them refugees and survivors who understood what it meant to rebuild from nothing. "Do you remember," Selena said, turning in her chair to face him, "what you told me that night on the rooftop, about some people being worth saving, even when they don't believe it themselves?" "I remember everything about that night. I've been thinking about that lately, about how we spent so many years believing we weren't worth saving, weren't worth choosing, weren't worth the risk of loving completely." She stood, moving to the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the city they'd conquered together. "We were wrong." Cade joined her at the window, his reflection merging with hers in the glass. "We were terrified. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Because I think terror was just our excuse for not believing we deserved something beautiful." She turned to study his profile, noting the new lines around his eyes, not from violence this time, but from laughter, from the kind of happiness they'd never thought they'd be allowed to have. "You saved me twice, you know." Once in Kabul, and once when you taught me that the most dangerous thing I could do was also the most necessary. What was that? Trusting someone else with my heart when I had everything to lose. Below them, Manhattan hummed with 8 million stories of people building their own empires, fighting their own wars, making their own choices about love and safety, and the space between. From this height, the city looked manageable, conquerable, full of possibilities rather than threats. "There's something I want to show you," Cade said, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. Selena's breath caught. "We're already married." Not a ring. He opened the box to reveal a small key, ornate and old-fashioned, clearly crafted by hand. "Remember the safe house in Switzerland? The one I wanted to send you to when the threats got serious? The one I refused to hide in while you fought our battles alone?" That one. His smile was soft with memory. "I bought it anyway. Turned it into something else. A place where we could go when we want to remember what peace feels like. No security details, no corporate emergencies, no medical appointments. Just us." The key felt warm in her palm, solid and real and heavy with promise. "You built us a sanctuary. I built us a choice. Somewhere we can go to be human instead of constantly being warriors." He closed her fingers around the key. "Because loving you taught me that the most important battles aren't about survival, they're about creating something worth surviving for." Selena felt tears streaming down her cheeks. But for the first time in years, they weren't tears of fear or pain. They were tears of gratitude for the kind of love that didn't just survive in the spaces between bullets and board meetings, it thrived there. "I love you, Cade Virelli. I love that you really see me and choose me anyway. I love that you taught me the difference between building walls and building a life. I love you too, Selena Vale. I love that you're brave enough to bet everything on us when the odds were stacked against us from the beginning." They stood there in their tower of glass and steel, two people who'd learned that the most valuable empire wasn't built on fear and power. It was built on the courage to trust someone else with your heart, even when that trust felt like the most dangerous thing in the world. Because sometimes the most important question isn't whether you'll survive the war. Sometimes it's whether you're willing to risk everything for the chance to win it together. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, you discover that the person standing beside you in the darkness isn't just your ally in battle, they're your home. My family. What struck me most about their journey is that they didn't just save each other, they saved the best versions of themselves. That's what real love does. It doesn't complete you. It challenges you to become who you were meant to be. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear that broken things can be made whole again, that love can be complicated and still be beautiful, and that sometimes the most powerful act is choosing to create rather than destroy. Subscribe for more stories of hope, and comment below with your own second chance story. You are loved, you are worthy, and your story matters too.